So in this video, I'm going to highlight some of the points which will show why exactly the government doesn't want to solve the housing price issue or the rent issue, right? These issues can be very easily tackled, could be very easily solved, but I'll share that why exactly government doesn't want to handle or tackle those. So I moved to Canada about 9 years ago, and I've seen the country change a lot in the last 9 years, right? People used to smile uh, to one another all the time, and now we don't see any smiles, and we don't see any face expressions also. Everybody is facing a very tough time and has happened in the last 8 or 9 years. So why exactly we see that the pricing of the homes will not reduce and the government will reduce? Number one is the MPs or the ministers or the elected ministers and all who are sitting in the parliament. So what percentage of these ministers do you think would be owning more than one property, right? I'm sure more than 50% of the leaders would be owning more than one property. Now, what is the incentive for these leaders to work in favor of the first time home buyers or like work in the favor of the people who have not been able to meet the ends and all, right? So every businessman wants to make sure that their business grows, right? They don't lose money in their businesses. So these MPs and MLAs and all who are selected, who sit in the parliament and all, even they have made buying of the homes and all also as a business. So none of these businessmen would want their business value to go down. So first, there is no incentive or there is misalignment of the incentives and all. So first rule, if you bring in that like any MP and all, whoever joins the parliament, they should not have like more than one home, right? And or they should rent. If you just make sure that people who join the government, they should not own a home, they should rent, their family should rent, you will immediately see the housing prices would be solved overnight, right? Because none of them are facing this problem at all, so they didn't want to solve it. This is the biggest problem, right? Next is, now think about in the last 10 years, what new innovations have been brought in, what new companies have been created and all. So some of the companies which I see around is immigration, around international students, like creating of private colleges and all, selling of the food and all to international students, right? And so I don't see any new innovation happening there, any tourism and all being promoted there, any manufacturing being brought in, and no new type of services being brought in and all. So what is the business that Canadian government created in last 9 years, right? It was primarily bringing in more international students and artificially inflating the GDP. If you stop the international students, the GDP would shrink by 2 to 5%. Now, the government doesn't want to show that it was always bringing in recession with every quarter, right? Now, to make sure that even artificially the numbers are getting pumped up and all, what the government did was it artificially inflated these numbers by bringing in more and more people, right? Otherwise, you would have seen that the Canadian government, like the Canada, would have already seen recession maybe many years ago because there was no real growth brought in. Next is the frauds on immigration and all. Eh, Now, so Canada brings in like hundreds of thousands of people, and they are like could be I would say like could be 20, like 50,000 people at least would be coming under fraud things and all, which should be tackled for sure. But people, when they come under fraud things and all, they pay some to some illegal, like to some agent in Canada, right? When they're paying some, like, so they pay all of their life's earning to agent who are bringing them illegally, but the agent lives in Canada, right? But the money is coming into Canada. So if Canadian government really solves those immigration problems, like immigration frauds also, less money would come into Canada, right? I think for sure the GDP would reduce if by 0.5% if these checks and balances have been brought in, right? So these are ethically should be solved, right? Right away should be solved, but the government is not willing to solve it. Next is house prices themselves, like housing has been treated as the primary business in the last 10 years, last 8, 9 years, right? Again, what type of small businesses did we create? What type of organizations did Canada create? What type of products did Canada sell internationally? What type of services did Canada sell internationally? All we were doing was we were selling houses expensive, like quite expensively, either to other Canadians or to the new immigrants who recently migrated to Canada, right? So it is when you sell like expensive homes to your brothers and sisters, you can feel like that you made in money, right? But your family is impacted now, right? So selling homes to other Canadians at very expensive price is not a business. The government, why did government not act on it? Because when all of these transactions are happening, like there's 5% of the money that either goes to agents or some percent of the money goes to these fees and all. And there was no other business that was brought in the last 9 years, right? So if home business, like if the homes would not have been treated as a business, the GDP would have shrunk by five, like another 10%, right? And I am 100% sure if we just factor in these things, if we take out the GDP growth based on the international students, based on the growth in housing and all, the Canadian economy would have shrunk a lot as compared to last 9 or 10 years, right? And that will show the real face of the government, like that will show what if they have done any innovation, if they have created the bad shape of the economy, right? So let's share this video, share that homes are not a business, right? Like we should at least bring in the policy that every MP should rent a home before they can join as an MP and all. We will see overnight the housing prices, the renting issue would be solved overnight, right? It is very easy to solve housing prices and all, right? Rent prices and all, the government will never solve it because there is no incentive for these people to solve the housing prices. If they try to solve it, right, they would lose money. I also bought home in 2021. I paid very high prices, but I have seen why I moved to Canada. And I was initially in US, then I came to Canada. I saw like such a nice culture for my family, such a nice culture for my kids. Still, I feel like my kids would have the best culture if we stay in Canada, right? So for me, if I see culturally, Canada is for sure number one country for any immigrants, right? I don't mind if my house prices gets reduced by 33%, but at least my kids would be very happy. They will be able to like work towards their interests and all, would be able to take risks and all, create businesses rather than just thinking about housing and all. So let's share this video. Let's make sure we work on the right things. We work on products, we work on innovation, we work on services that bring in money from outside of the Canada, inside Canada, rather than just treating housing as the primary business, which Canadian government has promoted to do because they didn't want anybody to see their real face and they didn't want anybody to see their dumbness and all because they didn't brought in any innovation, they didn't promote any small businesses at all because they don't have intelligence to do that. Thank you. Please share this video and subscribe to my channel.